What if I told you the single greatest threat to your dreams isn't failure? It's something far smaller, something quiet, innocent, something as harmless as a cat. Sounds strange, doesn't it? But that's exactly what a revered monk said as he lay on his deathbed, in a quiet monastery filled with disciples, as the final breath escaped his lips. He looked into the eyes of his chosen successor and whispered, "Never allow a cat into your life." That was it. No final prayer, no spiritual chant. It's just that one sentence. The disciples were stunned. The crowd that had gathered to hear his last words stood in silence, confused. And the young monk, his chosen heir, was left with a haunting question. What could a cat possibly have to do with spiritual wisdom or ruin? And what the young monk would discover in the days to come would not only answer that question, it would change the way he saw life, the mind, and the path of discipline forever. Because sometimes it's not the big battles that destroy us. It's the small compromises we never notice, till it's too late. The monastery was silent, too silent. A great spiritual master, a monk revered across the land, had just taken his final breath. His body lay still, but the air was thick with tension, confusion, and disbelief. Not because he was gone, his death had been expected, but because of the final words he had spoken. Never allow a cat into your life. The monks exchanged puzzled glances. Some thought it must be symbolic. Others assumed it was a joke, perhaps the last riddle from a wise man known for speaking in parables. But no one dared to laugh. The young successor, barely in his 20s, stood frozen. Had been chosen personally by the master, trained for years in silence, service, and self-control. And now, the only piece of guidance he had been left with was about a cat. He didn't dare dismiss it. This was the final teaching from a man who had reached the highest state of realization. It had to mean something. But what? Why a cat? Danger could such a harmless creature possibly represent? As the master's body was cremated with full rituals and reverence, the young monk's heart was far from at peace. The more he tried to ignore those words, the louder they echoed in his mind. Never allow a cat into your life. It wasn't just a warning, it felt like a key to something deeper. He just didn't know what had unlocked Dash yet. Days passed, but the strange message clung to the young monk's thoughts like a shadow that wouldn't lift. He tried to return to his routine, meditating, leading prayers, fulfilling his new role as the monastery's head, but inside, he was restless. His mind kept circling back to that one sentence. Not a word from the sacred texts, not a mantra or blessing, but a warning about a cat. Replayed every conversation he had ever had with the master. Was there a clue he had missed? A hidden meaning, or perhaps a lesson about attachments, distractions, or temptation? Still, he couldn't connect the dots. Then one morning, as the young monk sat alone under a Bodhi tree, lost in contemplation, he was approached by an elder old monk who had lived in the monastery for decades. His hair was white, his steps slow, but his eyes sharp and knowing. "I've watched you," the elder said gently. "You haven't been at peace since the master left us." The young monk nodded. "Before he passed, he told me, never allow a cat into your life. I want to understand, but I can't." What did he mean? The old monk smiled softly as if he'd been waiting for that question. "My dear friend," he said, "perhaps it's time you heard the whole story. The story behind the cat." And with that, the old monk began to speak. "A long time ago," the old monk began, "your master was not the saintly figure you knew. He was a young man, restless, brilliant, and full of questions. He had renounced his family, his possessions, and even his name, all in search of truth. With only 2 robes and a begging bowl, he ventured deep into the forest near a quiet village, where he began his life of solitude and meditation. Each day he would walk to the village with his bowl, humbly asking for food. The villagers, moved by his peaceful presence and dedication, welcomed him with open hearts. They respected him so deeply that they built him a small bamboo hut near the forest's edge, giving him a place to rest and meditate. It was the perfect life for a seeker. Silent, simple, sacred, But even in this quiet life, problems found him soon. Rats began to invade his little hut, chewing holes in his robes, the only clothing he had. He stitched and repaired them until he couldn't anymore. Eventually, he mentioned his trouble to the villagers. One of them smiled and said, "Why don't you keep a cat? It'll chase the rats away." It seemed like a harmless suggestion. Just a small help for a small problem, so he accepted a cat. And that was the beginning of the end. At first, the cat solved everything. The rats disappeared. His robes were safe. Peace returned to the little hut. But peace has a price. It often comes with hidden terms. The cat needed milk. Every day, the monk had to walk to the village, not just for food now, but also to beg for milk. It disrupted his meditation, consumed his time. When he shared this new problem, a kind villager offered a solution. "Why don't you keep a cow? That way you'll have fresh milk for the cat and for yourself, too." It made sense. One small solution for a small inconvenience. So he accepted the cow. But cows need grass, water, attention, and soon the monk found himself going to the village again, not for wisdom, not for teaching, but to beg for grass. Again, the villagers offered help. "There's a widow in our village," they said. "She's kind, alone. If we ask her, she would gladly care for the candor for you." The monk hesitated, but not for long. The widow moved in. She tended the cow, fed the cat, cooked meals, even cleaned his hut. She was respectful, devoted, and for a time, everything seemed perfect. But slowly, so slowly, he didn't even notice. The sacred rhythm of his life began to shift. What had begun as a simple solution to a simple problem was becoming something much more. With the widow by his side, the monk's life changed subtly at first, then completely. She was gentle, kind, efficient. She looked after the hut, the cow, the cat, and soon the monk himself, grateful for her help. The monk began assisting her first in the field, then with meals, then with daily chores. What once was a life of solitude and silence was now filled with shared moments, whispered conversations, and silent companionship. They worked side by side, day after day, and where two hearts work together, emotions begin to bloom. The widow, young and beautiful in her own quiet way, had also once walked through pain, and now with the monk she found peace. The monk, once detached and untouched by worldly ties, found something even more dangerous, comfort. Their connection deepened, and slowly, inevitably, the sacred line blurred. The monk, once a man who had renounced all worldly pleasures, found himself falling into the very world he had walked away from. That their bond turned into affection, and affection turned into intimacy. Months passed, and one day the woman told him she was pregnant. In that moment, everything shattered. He sat beneath the stars, exhausted from a long day of tending the field. His hands, once folded in prayer, were now calloused from labor. His mind, once focused on enlightenment, was now occupied with thoughts of feeding a child, caring for a family, and fixing a leaky roof. And suddenly, the silence struck him. "What happened to me?" he whispered to himself. He had left behind a wife and children to seek truth. He had walked into the forest to escape the chains of worldly life, yet here he was again, a family, a daily routine bound by needs and responsibilities. It all felt familiar, too familiar. He closed his eyes and retraced every step. It hadn't happened overnight. It had crept in, slowly, quietly, softly first. The rats, then the cat, then the cow, then the widow. And now this entire life, it had all started with something so small, so harmless, so ordinary again. Back in the present, the old monk finished the story and looked at the young successor, his eyes calm, but filled with weight. "You see now," he said gently, "when the master told you, never allow a cat into your life, he wasn't warning you about animals, he was warning you about the mind." The young monk listened, his confusion melting into realization that cat, the elder continued, was just the first indulgence, the first distraction, the first door left slightly open. But once you open that door, and a little your mind walks through it. And then it never stops. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens inch by inch. Small compromise, a tiny pleasure, a harmless indulgence, until one day you look back and you don't recognize who you are anymore. That's what the great monk was trying to teach. In his final breath, not with fear, but with truth, because even the wisest among us are only one decision away from drifting off the path. And if someone as enlightened as him could be pulled back into the world, what about the rest of us? And so, now the question isn't, why did the monk warn about a cat? It's, what's the cat in your life? Is it a late-night scroll that turns into hours lost online? Is it one harmless habit that you know isn't serving you, but you allow it anyway? Is it a toxic relationship, a craving, a distraction that slowly grows louder until it owns your thoughts? Because the truth is, the downfall of even the strongest minds begins not with failure, but with a tiny compromise. Just once. Just today. Just a little. And before you know it, no longer walking toward your goals. You're walking in circles. The monk didn't fall in one giant leap. He fell step by step, silently. Unaware, and so do we. That's why the master's final lesson was so potent.